Is your business leaving money on the table because nobody remembers your name? Dan Antonelli, founder of KickCharge Creative, has branded over $1 billion worth of home service companies. In this episode, he shares his frameworks on how he's made that happen. Before we dive in, if you want the one-pager of actionable insights from this episode, click the link in the description, share the email, we'll send it right over. Now let's get into the episode. Dan Antonelli, founder of KickCharge Creative, author of Branded, Not Blanded. Welcome to Blue Collar Visionary.
Thanks, Danny.
Can you just give us a little background? How did you become one of the leading experts in branding?
It's kind of crazy. I mean, next year actually will be our 30th year in business, which just kind of blows my mind. But about 40 years or so ago, I literally hand lettered my first contractor van in my parents' backyard. So I kind of started out as a hand lettering artist. I did a lot of hand painted signs, hand painted truck lettering. I also did a lot of pinstriping, so pinstriping on motorcycles and cars and things like that. So everything by hand and with paint. And I thought it would be a great career to be a sign painter. My parents sort of had other ideas about that chosen pathway and suggested that maybe I go to college and learn a little bit more about the advertising world. And I actually did. I went to college and I got a degree in advertising and communications. And so I learned an awful lot about the marketing behind branding. And I think that experience actually was super helpful for me to leverage that experience and that knowledge as I started the business. But I graduated and I wound up working as a graphic designer in Manhattan for about 5 years. And then I started the business like many entrepreneurs do, sort of as my side hustle. So I would schlep into New York City on a 7 a.m. train from New Jersey, and then I would come home about 7 o'clock at night, and then I would basically start working at around 8:30 or so, and then work till 1, 2 in the morning, and I did that for a year or so until I finally kind of had enough work that I could sort of quit my day job. And I had a great day job too, which made it even harder to leave because it was great benefits. I had a great boss. I was able to maybe sneak in a little bit of my own work while I was on the clock, so to speak. And but I always thought, like if I'm ever gonna do this, like I didn't have kids at the time, and I had a wife that was a teacher that had great benefits, and so like I was just like there won't be any other time to try this. So I was like, well, let me give it a shot, and so it's weird now looking back at that because that's, like I said, it's 29 years ago that I started. I think I was 27 at the time. And it's bizarre to me now that we have almost 40 people here. We just surpassed $10 million in revenue this year, which again, just really blows my mind. But it's a really, really cool thing that we've been able to build here. And what I love about what we do, and what I loved even back then 30 years ago, was just knowing that the work that we do can change people's lives and impact the owners of these businesses in a very, very significant manner. So, we're blessed that we get to live our why on a daily basis, and the responsibility that we're given to work with these companies is a huge responsibility, and it's something that none of us here take lightly because we know how critical our job is for their success. So it's an awesome responsibility, but it's one that we really embrace. And I think that recognizing how critical our role is in their journey is one of the reasons why I think we've been so successful, because we really treat that responsibility with such care that it's really kind of the backbone of our why.
So just to lay the groundwork, how would you describe brand to somebody that isn't necessarily so familiar with what else it is besides a logo and a name and a mascot? How should somebody think about what their brand is, or just like a very 101 level, like what is brand?
Yeah, I think it's a term that gets tossed around, and maybe people, sometimes get confused about what it actually does mean or can mean. And certainly there's a lot of definitions as people say, well, a brand is what people say about your business behind your back. So if they were at a party and they were talking to their neighbors, how would they describe the experience of working with you and your company? Which is one way to look at it. In my book, I've kind of distilled it into this notion of a wheel. So I kind of look at branding as kind of this wheel, and in the center of that wheel is your logo. So it's really important that you get that center correct, right? Because you're going to be building out this wheel, and these spokes that go around this wheel are things that are made up of your brand or encapsulate your brand. So your social media voice, your uniforms, your website, the graphics on your truck, your site signs, uniforms, all these things comprise the brand as a whole. Now, again, the problem is if you don't get that hub correct, you can still build a wheel. It's just not going to turn very well or turn very efficiently. And using that analogy, something that's inefficient, what that's going to mean for you as a business owner is it means you're just going to need to be spending more money to essentially get that wheel to turn or get your marketing wheel to turn. So the weaker the brand, the more expensive you can expect your marketing costs to be, because again, you're working against so many obstacles that are rooted in the foundation of that brand.
So what's the hub? How does somebody figure out their hub?
So the hub would be, again, just investing in what that logo actually is, what the name of your company is as well. Those are two things to really consider as you're building this brand for yourself, and making sure that if you were to judge your company just on that alone, like in the absence of anything else, like I've not visited your website, I know nothing else about you except maybe the logo that I see on the side of a truck, or the business card you handed to me on an elevator. What do I think the experience will be like if I hired your company? So everything that we're doing as a branding agency is ultimately driven by the notion of how much can I control what a consumer believes about the experience of hiring you before you actually get an opportunity to even perform that service. So many contractors, I think, they perform a great service, and after the job is done, maybe the homeowner is really happy with the service they received. The thing that we're trying to do is I'm trying to make it so Mrs. Jones, who's thinking about hiring you, believes something about that experience before you even get the opportunity to perform that service. So all the signals that you're putting out, whether it's, again, the truck wrap, your business card, the messages on your website, your social media voices, all those things are contributing to Mrs. Jones believing something about your company. And what are you doing to control that narrative as best you can? So we want to make it so that before the contractor gets to ring the doorbell, Mrs. Jones has already established a very, very positive impression of what the experience may look like if she chose to hire you. And those things also, like beyond the notion of her having a positive expectation, also goes along with the notion of what does she expect to pay for the services. So, you often hear contractors, sort of complain that they can't get paid what they're worth, or they can't get paid what they think they should be paid for their job, or no one's going to pay me that money. And a lot of that sometimes is self-inflicted, meaning the brand doesn't communicate a reason or a rationale as to why Mrs. Jones believes that she should pay a premium for your service. So everything that we're doing, all the messaging that goes out are meant to have her believe something is unique about the experience, something is better about the experience. There's more trust that's established with those signals that she's receiving, and those are all things that factor into her deciding whether or not she's going to hire you. So, are you going to be around next year if there's a problem with the job? Branding goes a long way towards instilling trust, confidence, And you have to understand too that most homeowners already have a negative bias against contractors to begin with, right? So they're worried about who's coming to their home. They're worried about whether they're going to show up, whether they're going to do a good job, whether they'll be around if there's an issue down the road. So again, all those signals that your brand is communicating are meant to have her feel a certain way about that.
Okay, so I want to let's get into the hypothetical real quick. Say somebody owns a tree company and it's just their last name, Anderson Tree Company.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's good because it starts with an A. Okay, that's their brand. What patterns, what questions should people be asking themselves? How can they determine whether to go down like the family owned and operated route or adopt an animal as their mascot, or like somebody that's pretty new? Where can they start to begin developing this brand?
So a couple of things. First off, I'm gonna recommend that if you're unsure about your own brand and you want to know what are the criteria that we normally use to judge the effectiveness of a brand. We actually developed an online tool for people. It's free. We're not going to spam you or anything like that. But if you go to sparktest.kickcharge.com, you can literally take a test regarding your own brand, and it will ask you the questions about the 10 criteria that we use to judge a brand. So you just mentioned one of them being the name of the company was Anderson, I believe you had said was the name of the company. So we're going to ask you questions about, do you have a last name based brand? Do you have a brand name that uses initials like TJS Tree Service? Let's just say as an example. So the two worst things that you can ever name your home service company is your last name. And the absolute worst you could ever name your home service company is initials. So AJS Landscaping, AJS Home Services, AJS Heating and Air. And why are those bad? So why would a last name be bad? Well, it's my last name, and I'm really proud of my name, and I'm going to stand behind my work, and all these notions about that. And I understand that, but the real challenge with that is that, first of all, initial based brands are almost impossible to have people remember. Right? So why would I ever remember AJS Heating and Air? What about that particular name is actually sticky or going to live in my mind rent free when I need your services in 6 months? Like, I saw your van once, why would I ever remember it? Right? So that's one of the challenges with initial based brands. Super hard to remember. Last name based brands, you could say, well, over time, people may come to associate a specific promise with a last name brand. So you may become synonymous in your community over a very lengthy period of time where people say, oh my God, Anderson, they do great work. Anderson does great work. Anderson does great work. That's going to take a really long time. And for those who still have never heard of you and have never used you, I don't have a promise associated with that particular last name. So I don't know what the expectation is. I don't know if it's going to be good, if it's going to be bad. The other challenge too is I can't associate a very specific graphic with that particular name. Meaning, as soon as I say the name, I don't know what the logo should look like because the last name doesn't signify an image or paint a picture of an image. So again, as you think about making the most of every single impression that transpires in your local community, I'm doing everything I possibly can to try to make it so that when I see that van once and I see it twice, it registers in my mind as something that I can recall later on. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Because if I'm hoping you're going to type in my name into Google, which is the goal, right? I want you to type in my name, not air conditioning repair near me, because if it's air conditioning repair near me, now I'm paying for that lead. I'm paying to be at the top of that list. But if it was a branded search term, like Grasshopper Heating and Air, which is a company we renamed. They used to be called PMA Comfort or PMA Mechanical. But Grasshopper, maybe you've never seen that logo, Danny, but I bet you imagine you can visualize what that logo might look like, right? So it's probably going to use a grasshopper, right? So every time I see this grasshopper and then I see the word grasshopper next to it, it's leaving more of an impression than PMA Comfort would ever leave with me. And not only that, I can tell a much different brand story about grasshoppers, because grasshoppers can only actually move forward. So what does that mean for me as a customer? What does that mean for me as an employee, right? So those are all messages that are coming from that particular brand that you could never get from something like PMA Comfort or an initial base brand. So again, maximize each opportunity that each impression makes so that the customer can recall the name later on. That's the ultimate goal, and that's why last name brands, initial base brands are more challenging.
Okay, that's really interesting, the grasshopper, because it seems kind of like random, but there's something I like about it. It's like, I think about like a ninja, like in the dojo, like young grasshopper. I don't know. There's good things associated. Can you tell the story of how maybe you had to convince the owner? I don't know, but like that transition from PMA Comfort to Grasshopper, like what's that journey like?
Yeah, so in her case, PMA Mechanical was probably about 80% commercial work, commercial HVAC work, and 20% residential. And then during COVID, the governor shut down all the commercial HVAC projects, and suddenly she found herself with almost no work. And so she came to me and she said, Dan, I really want to rebrand. I want you to do a nice truck wrap design for us. But I love PMA Comfort or PMA Mechanical, I think it was called. And that's what I want to keep. And I said, Amanda, her name is Amanda Triolo. By the way, one of the most successful, inspiring owners, I think, in the planet. Like, she has built... She built the company after we rebranded at $100,000 in residential sales to over $20 million in under 3 years. I think it was just under 3 years she did it, which is insane. Like 100 to 20 million in 3 years is pretty unheard of. And this is in Albany. But so anyway, I said to her, Amanda, listen, I would love to help you, and I really want to help you, but I can't help you if you want to keep the name PMA Comfort, because it will never move the needle far enough to get to where you want to go. So I'm just not going to take money from you for something that I don't believe in, that I don't believe will help you. And if you ever decide you want to change the name, I would love to help you. And so she was a little unhappy with me at that point and was disappointed that I wouldn't help her. And she's like, you know what, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna still do it. So she, about 6 or 7 weeks later, she called me back and she said, okay, I'm ready. And so I said, great. And then I came up with the name Grasshopper for her. We learned all these great things about what grasshoppers can and can't do. And one of them, like I said, is they can only move forward. So it's actually, their tagline is "Forward is a way of life." And that's kind of what the brand is known for now, not just to the customers, but to their employees. So if you're looking to work there, as a company, we're going to do everything we can to empower your career, to move your career forward in a very deliberate manner. And it also speaks to what I might expect to get as a homeowner. So usually successful, probably one of the most successful renames and rebrands that we've done, or one of the fastest growing ones, I should say.
Wow. That's incredible. I was kind of entranced with that story, so I wasn't teeing up the next question.
No. Yeah, but like, to your point too, Danny, like, was it hard for her to hear that PMA sucked? Did she want to hear that from me? No, she wanted to hear from me that I could perform some miracle with a name that was never going to get her to where she wanted to go. And so that is often what many owners experience when they're sort of confronted with the notion that they should rebrand, because whatever success they've attained up until that point, they sort of rationalize that that's why they actually shouldn't change, right? I've made it to 500,000 in revenue with this name that you say sucks. I'm like,
Right.
well, maybe you would have been at 1 million in revenue with a better name, right? So you have to kind of sort of get in the mindset of understanding that the success that you've attained with whatever you have is admirable. Like, it's great. Like, that's super awesome. Like, sometimes I'm dumbfounded with how well people have done with weak brands, but then my mind starts spinning. I'm like, well, this guy's got operations dialed in. This guy's running a really good company. Imagine if he had a brand that looked as good as he really actually was. Like, then he would just torch this thing, right? So I think that that's sometimes the idea that you have to think about is how much better might I be doing with a better brand? How much less might I be spending on marketing? How much less might I be spending to acquire a new customer? And those are the questions that I think you have to sometimes dig deep and ask yourself. And I think also too, you have to recognize that, you know, as an owner, this isn't your world. Like, branding companies isn't what you do for a living. So it's understandable that maybe you made some mistakes very early on. Like, I wish people would read my book the moment that they decide that they want to start a business, because it will save them a ton of heartache later on. Like, I wish that was the first book you read before you formed your LLC, because it would help you in so many ways understand what the mission is.
All right, now you got me questioning everything. Because I'm a videographer. But I wanted to keep my brand kind of general when I was first starting out. I just chose Green Media. Okay, so my last name is Green. I think I don't know, I like it, and for what you just said, it's like my name is behind it. I'm going to deliver quality work. But now I'm talking to you, Dan Antonelli, but you have KickCharge Creative. It's like, oh, okay, it's very clear. If you had been Antonelli Creative or something, it's like, it's not the same. So and you can use PMA as an example, but talk to me, because I want to know this. How could I not lose the brand equity that I've built up, goodwill with people? How can somebody transition from their current brand and transition well to the new brand? What does that bridge look like?
Yeah. So first off, I mean, you have one of the unique last name based brands, which does evoke something. Okay. It doesn't evoke a promise very specifically, but it evokes a color. And I can associate color with your brand name, and I can connect those dots a lot easier than I could with Antonelli, right? There's nothing to connect. But green, now I could do something. I would use color to try to connect those dots. Give you an example. Like, we once did branding for a home service company called Barker, and we used a dog as the mascot. So now I could connect Barker with the notion of a dog, and I can visually connect the dots. So there are examples where a last name brand can work, so long as that last name brand evokes something, whether it's a visual or an obvious visual, or in your case, a color. Those are all things that you can actually leverage to your advantage, which makes it more unique, that particular situation. But I think as you think about, you know, okay, the trauma involved in renaming your business and rebranding your company, and certainly the worry about all these customers that have used me, are they not going to use me now? What do I do with those people? And so there's a very deliberate process that you go through to let everyone know that there's been a name change, that this is the new name. This is what it means for them as a customer. Typically, from a logistical standpoint, it's relatively straightforward. 99% of our clients that rename, and we'll probably rename over 100 home service companies this year, I think. Wow. But most of them file a DBA. You won't lose your Google rankings. You won't lose your Facebook page. So those are all logistical things that you can really overcome. And you know, to speak on that point too, Danny, like, we renamed our agency in 2017. So when I started this company originally in 1995, I called it Graphic Designs. As a matter of fact, it's so funny. I have my old business card literally right here. So it was graphic D dash signs, and I thought it was clever because I did signs, and then I also did graphic design work. So I thought, oh, how clever is that? And then 17 years later, I'm like, this doesn't even make any sense. We don't even do signs, and we're not a graphic design company. We're a branding agency, and so I had to go walk that that line myself and say, is this who we are anymore? And the answer was no. And I knew it was no for a long time, but I was the same way. I was like scared about making the change. It was 17 years with that name. So I'm like, oh man, like I'm going to lose this. It's going to be hard for people to know. All my family was like, this is a huge mistake. Why are you doing this? But I could tell you if we hadn't done it, there's absolutely no way that we are where we are today with the old name. Zero chance. Like we would, we were doing okay. Maybe I think at that point maybe we had like 12 employees or something. But there's no way we get to where we are today without fixing that fundamental flaw. We did great work, but the name didn't communicate that. It also just didn't communicate the energy and the enthusiasm we bring to a business after we rebrand them. And that's kind of the origins of the name. So I had to do it too. I had to go through the process. I had to listen to a lot of people say it was a huge mistake. Don't do this. Why are you doing this? And I even had some employees actually crying about it. But for us, again, it was literally the best thing that we've ever done. And again, going through it, out of the 150 or so companies that we've renamed, I really can't think of a single instance where people regretted that decision. Most of them, again, have gone from being invisible in their own communities to being something that they're well known. Like even the one that you referenced before we got on about the garage door company, Rise and Shine. They used to be called, they used to be called Garage Door Solutions. And they've been in your community for a really long time, but I bet you never noticed them or knew who they were or anything. But that big rooster on the side of that van is something that sticks in your mind, and it's a lot more memorable. And I find that happens often with people where they're like, they sort of lament the fact that they've been in this community for a decade, and everyone thinks they're a brand new company because they never heard of the old company. And again, that's the idea of blending in and not being disruptive with the brand.
Hey, if you're enjoying the show, can you take 4 seconds and press like or hit subscribe? Everybody asks for it. They do it for a reason. It helps with the algorithm. It's a signal that this is good stuff. When you do that, it gets sent to more people. I can make more of these episodes. All right, I'm assuming you've done it. That's about how long it would have taken to do it. Now back to the show. I'm loving this. This is awesome. After the rebrand, what do you have any examples of how a brand can launch, or like how should they do marketing stunts? Is that a thing, or do you just kind of put it out there?
It's always nice if you can do it in a concerted effort. So I love to see when clients involve their employees in the launch. So we've had clients do stuff like they'll have a big luncheon and they'll have the new branded truck wraps outside the garage, but no one sees it yet. And then they'll have a presentation talking about the history of the company, the evolution of the company, and where they hope to go as a company, and why the rebranding is so important in that journey. And so they're sort of involving the actual employees in the excitement of the rebrand, and having them understand that this investment that they're making back into the company is for their benefit as well, because they're trying to build a better future for their employees, and this is one part of that puzzle. And so they'll have all the new swag with the new logo on it, the uniforms for the guys, and hand out sweatshirts and all those other things, and then roll up the garage and there's the new brand. So that's one way to get the employees involved. So I love doing that as a launch with the employees. And then as far as the existing customers, we typically like to send out obviously email marketing to all the existing customers, and then we like to do a direct mail piece to all the existing customers as well. Let them know, hey, we've rebranded or we've renamed. We want to thank you for being a customer of ours all these years. We're grateful. This is part of our journey, and we couldn't be here without you. And of course, if you're an HVAC contractor, you may want to answer questions at that point about whether their warranties are still intact. Make sure they know it's the same great company, the same great ownership, same great leadership, and so just reminding them that everything is going to be the same from that perspective, but thanking them for the ability to grow within the community and to have the opportunity to serve them. So there's a number of ways to roll it out. That's certainly, sometimes it's hard to do everything all at once. For example, if you have multiple vehicles, it may be hard to have every single one of them rewrapped simultaneously. And so sometimes there's a period of time where your old brand lives with the new brand, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes we've done rebrands for companies with 40 or 50 trucks, and it takes 6 months to convert everything over. So just accept the fact that there may be some time that you have both things for a little while. But it's really funny too, because sometimes you see the owners just get so pissed off if one of the employees comes in with the old uniform on or something like that, just because they're so excited about the new one. But it doesn't happen overnight sometimes, and it will take a little bit of time to get everything acclimated. Obviously, you got to change your website, change the logo on there, maybe the brand colors, things like that.
Yeah. Wow. It is a lot. I understand now more why you're saying read that book. Branded, not blanded. Read that before you start your company. You're going to save a lot of time and money. Hey, so after you do this, like to me, the logo, the uniforms, that's all, beautiful and awesome and fun. What have you noticed? Are there changes that companies make to their more core, like systems, identity, like internal values? It seems like this would be a great time to institute new things to the company, to actually create structures that will deliver on this new brand promise and this new brand image. Are there any suggestions, or what have you seen companies do to internally to, like, the systems implemented to continue strengthening the brand? That was a long question.
No, but it's a great question because you're talking about things related to culture. You're talking about things related to what is our why, and how does this brand help communicate our why? And I think those are all really great questions. And I have a really good example of a company that went through the rebranding and actually the renaming process with us. And it's for a pretty large garage door company called Rightway Garage, based out in California. And what happened with them is their original brand name was RW Garage. And they came to us and they asked us to rebrand, and we had some conversations, and I said, what does RW stand for? And I think it used to be the initials of two different owners or something, and they just kind of put them together, and that's how they came up with RW. And I said, well, what if RW could mean right way, right? Because right way, to me, signals a number of different things. As a consumer, it signals to me that the job that you'll perform for me will be done the right way. And maybe that sounds like, well, I would hope it's done the right way, but now you're literally communicating that as the promise, right? So we as a company, we're committed to doing things the right way for you as a customer. So that's a great external message that the customer receives. But from an internal perspective, that really became their rallying cry as well. So if you're an employee of Rightway Garage, there are standards at which we will perform our duties, and they all must measure up to the standard of doing it the right way. So you look at that from a culture perspective, and now you're doing more. Again, it's more than a really cool logo. It's more than a really cool truck wrap, which they are. But it's the mission that the company has and the commitment that it has to doing things the right way. So if you're there as a slacker and you're going to cut corners, and this isn't the right place for you, because that's not what we believe in here. That's not how we operate as a company. So I think the brand, when it's done correctly, has a lot of that power behind it. When you can integrate some of the storylines to go along with why that particular company is named as such. Again, too, like obviously Grasshopper, again, the notion of, forward is a way of life. That same exact thing works really, really well for that. So, as you think about your own brand name, does it communicate some of those values, not only to the customers that you're trying to serve, but to your employees as well? And in an ideal world, it communicates to both those audiences and tells them what the promise might look like.
One of the systems I'm curious about that I deal a lot with is, creating content. And how should people think about creating their content to be on brand versus like how preoccupied or should people, like for social media, does everything need to be like on brand, or is there room to experiment and be lenient? Or how do you think about social media and just creating content in general from a brand perspective?
I think the biggest thing to think about, first off, is be authentic. Okay, so be real in the videos. Be authentic. If your brand is one that is fun, that has a sense of humor about it, then it's okay that the videos also have a sense of humor. And I think Rise and Shine is a great example of a company that has really done well on social media, has really done well to embrace that rooster that's central to their brand. And like literally they dress up as roosters at community events and parades, and they walk alongside the van, and they really, really get into it. And that notion too of being authentic to the brand is so visible in all their channels. If you go to their TikTok channel and you watch some of their videos, they're funny. Like they're funny, they're memorable, and they are what I would expect from their particular brand, because their brand has a playful vibe to it. And I think that notion to your point, as far as like, how important it is to be active with video and social and making sure you're doing what you can to get your name out there. Like that's the beauty of the idea of a disruptive brand, is that you can live in people's minds and they can recall it later on. So imagine that you're at that community event in your own hometown there, and you see this beautifully wrapped, Ford Transit that's going 3 miles an hour, and then there's a bunch of guys, dressed as roosters, walking alongside that van, throwing out candy for Halloween, and you're there with your kid watching the parade go by, and it's literally 3 miles an hour, so you can't help but look away. There's nothing else to see but this van that's driving through there. And you think about, from the business owner's perspective, it's probably like $100 to be in the parade, right? Mm-hmm. So you tell me where you're going to spend $100 or $200 to walk in a parade in the heart of your community, where every single one of those people on the sidelines or on the sidewalk watching the parade, all of them are ideal customers for you, right? So the idea of making that investment in your own community with your brand, and instead of always saying, my only way to get new customers is for me to throw money at LSA and PPC, because that's an expensive game to play. And so, participating in those community events, having a brand that's disruptive, and then using the videos that you shoot at those events and putting them on social media, so they also recognize the people that this is an active participant in my own community, right? So those are all things that foster that trust. Because keep in mind, who does Mrs. Jones want to do business with? She wants to do business with someone she knows, she likes, and she trusts. So all those signals coming from social, from the videos, being active in the community, those are all things contributing to her feeling that way. And of course, again, having that brand name that's easy to remember, that I can recall later on, because not everyone that's on the sidewalk watching the parade needs a garage door repaired that day. but they may need one in a week, in a month, or in a year, right? So keep in mind those investments are long-term investments, but they pay dividends far beyond what you might see by just, you may spend $1,000 on LSA this week, and it's gone next week. You haven't gained anything beyond that. You haven't made any investment in furthering your brand. All you've done is pay for leads at that point. So that's a much different game than the investment in being visible in your own community.
I need to ask you something. Why did they name their company Rise and Shine and not Rooster Garage Door? Seems like there's some dissonance there.
Well, I mean, rise and shine, obviously the rising of the garage door goes along with that particular notion. And Rooster was unavailable for a trademark perspective.
Okay.
So.
Gotcha. So that's just, okay.
Yeah.
Not every option is going to be available.
Yeah.
Is that correct thinking, though, that you should have like the logo or the mascot and the name as closely aligned as possible? Like, because I'm going back to Grasshopper.
Grasshopper to Grasshopper is certainly an ideal scenario. It's not often that you can actually do that, but the notion of Rise and Shine and then the notion of a rooster, I mean, those concepts are somewhat synonymous with one another as well. Not as much as Grasshopper is, but certainly when you think about Rise and Shine, I mean, you also do think about a rooster. And so that's why we couple that image with that particular brand name. Again, just to try to aid in people remembering it.
Yeah. No, okay. I'm not like
no,
ripping
it's all
on
good.
it or anything.
It's a great question. I mean,
curious.
Those are the ideal scenarios where literally you say the name and you know the visual, but it doesn't happen as often as we might like because it's very hard to naming is a really hard task, right? So we do a lot of naming, but there's so many things that go into naming, and trademarking is a huge component of that, making sure that you can have a name, first of all, that you can even legally use, and secondly, a name ideally that you can trademark is kind of the gold standard.
I want to rewind a second because I love what you were saying about the parade and these. What you're looking for in marketing and advertising is attention, and that is underpriced attention. For $100, you get thousands of people in your community looking. I mean, that's so targeted. Have you heard of what other underpriced attention marketing things out there could you throw out that you think are?
Yeah,
cool.
So I mean, definitely I would sponsor as many little league teams or soccer teams or basketball teams as I possibly can. Usually very, very inexpensive. But now your child is wearing a jersey or a shirt that has the name of your business on their back for 3 or 4 months. Do you think they're going to forget who you are when they need that particular service? So again, it's a very easy and inexpensive way to be top of mind. I would also say that when there is a community event or a local community event where you have the opportunity to get a booth and to be visible and at that particular event, make sure that you have a booth that people want to stop by. And I think people get frustrated sometimes because like, well, I go to those events and no one ever comes by my booth. And I'm like, well, what have you done to make people want to come by your booth? And that's why you see mascots sometimes do really, really well at those types of shows, because if I'm a parent and I'm walking with my kid and there's a huge life-size mascot of this friendly mascot, whatever it may be, maybe it's a rooster, I'm going to probably stop by because I want to take a picture of my kid with this full-size mascot. We did the renaming of another garage door company, and we named them Jolly Goat. And their mascot that they bring to all these home shows are actual goats, right? So you're there with your family, you're walking through, and you go to these different booths, and then suddenly you're at this Jolly Goat garage, and they've got literally, real life goats there. And so, you're going to be interested in that, and you're going to check that out. And then again, are you going to remember Jolly Goat in 6 months when you need service, or are you going to go on Google and you're going to type in garage door repair near me, right? So again, being visible, having a brand name that people can remember, that they can recall. Those are all aspects that really aid in having people remember them. The other thing we didn't even talk about too, Danny, is we were talking about the idea of disruption, right, and being visible in the community. But I want people also to think about colors and what their brand colors are, because that's another really, really important aspect to think about. So are your brand colors unique in your market, or are there a million other companies using the same exact colors? And therefore you can't own them. So if you're using red, white, and blue for your brand colors, chances are you can't own those brand colors because they're associated with a hell of a lot of other things besides you specifically. But you're in Minnesota. You mentioned McQuillan Brothers, which is a brand that we created. Uses orange and light blue and ivory color as their primary brand colors. When we picked those colors for McQuillan, we were very deliberate in choosing them, and we looked at their top 10 competitors and what brand colors were not being used in that particular market, and we identified orange as being an opportunity to own that particular color scheme in that market. So think about your own brand in that same manner. Are there dozens of other companies that are using your same exact colors? Because colors is one of those things that also aid in recognition and also aid in having people recall your brand later on. So unique brand colors is something that we really, really stress. It's part of our process as we design brands for people, is doing the competitive analysis of everyone in their market and what colors are saturated and what colors we have opportunities in.
It's 3:00. Do you have a couple more
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. We've been focused on B2C or home service businesses for the most part, and I think that's mainly what you focus on. Just curious, are all these principles true for B2B companies too, or just say for me, I work with home services. Should I? Well, maybe not for me because we've already talked about me, but when does it become cheesy or gimmicky versus let's say a lawyer or something?
Yeah.
Does a lawyer need to have that image of being in the suit all uptight, or curious about that?
A lawyer's going to the extreme as far as typically how you might expect them to be branded. But when we have a business that has a mix of both residential and commercial work, then we are going to temper the approach a tad. Because I need to recognize that Mrs. Jones is very different than a facility manager or a property manager that is making decisions on multiple locations, maybe multiple buildings. He or she is a different type of person, and they don't have necessarily the same fears and the same wants that Mrs. Jones has. And so for those types of companies, we tend to do what we would term a blended approach. Meaning it's still disruptive, it's still unique, it's still eye-catching, but we tend to steer away from mascots in those particular instances. Maybe we'll do something that's icon-based. Sometimes we use a technique of maybe if the company name starts with a certain letter, maybe we make the mark about that letter. Like for example, obviously KickCharge uses the K from our brand. So we tend to look at that as again different. The same principles about disruption applies, but I'm doing it in a manner that still exhibits promise and still looks very premium and very polished. So you can definitely still create a disruptive brand that appeals to both, but you want to steer a little bit further away from things that I would say are fun or more playful approaches when you're dealing with that avatar, because they're going to be a little bit different certainly than a consumer would be.
Got a question adjacent to this whole brand thing, but I'm sure you and your team do a lot of brainstorming, ideation. You're tapped into creativity all day long. What have you learned about the creative process or working as a team and conducting a successful brainstorm? I mean, we're all solving problems. We all could use another dose of creativity in our life. Do you have any easy tips for us to be more creative?
I mean, we are really, really blessed because there's seven of us that literally work on the brands every day, and we have our own Slack channel for just the illustrators and the brand developers, and so the collaboration that we're able to achieve among all of us, and each of us has kind of a different, I don't say specialization, but some are better at different genres than others, and so we're really blessed in that sense that if I'm working on a particular project and I'm stuck, or I don't know quite how to solve a specific design problem, I can literally just post the image to the channel, and I'll have four guys mark it up and send it back, and so we're able to really kind of get the best of both worlds. But I would say, as you're trying to do this, if you're trying to work on some of these things yourself and trying to think about, how you can be most creative in thinking about branding, obviously having a background understanding of how the process works, or what makes an effective logo, is part of it, right? Because you can't solve the problem unless you understand the fundamentals, right? So having the background is really important. But I think the other thing that's really critical to think about is remember who it is that you are designing this logo for, and always keep them as your primary objective. And I say that because a lot of owners make the mistake of designing logos for themselves, and they're not the audience that it's most important for. Generally speaking, 90% or 85% of all home purchasing decisions are made by women. And so it's really important to think about her as your target audience. What would she think about your logo? Not what you would think if you're a guy, or your buddies, or anybody like that. Unless they're your target audience, then discount their opinion to a certain extent, because it's not who the brand is being designed for. So if you're selling, $50,000 kitchens, what would this brand say to Mrs. Jones, who's trying to find a contractor to perform that service? What would she think about hiring you? Would this logo appeal to her and what she's trying to accomplish in her kitchen, right? So be creative as much as you can in that sense, but always be cognizant of that audience that the brand is ultimately designed for, and think about it from that perspective.
In that exact example, say a luxury kitchen remodeler.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like, would they be illustrated at all? Is part of their brand being that just like sleek black, just like luxury feel, like a black card almost? Is that? But then it kind of negates the imagery of living in somebody's head, right?
Well, I think we've done some like really high-end cabinet companies and things like that, and they're not mascot based. They're going to be more sort of corporate in nature.
Okay.
But they still feel very, very high end and very premium. And there's ways that you can do that, still even deploying. I wouldn't call it necessarily a mascot in the sense of one that's cartoony, but you could do a more realistic version of a mascot, like the McQuillan brothers, and what those mascots. You could technically term them mascots, but they're almost like illustrations of the actual owners, and they do not feel like cheap, right? I mean, the way the illustrations are done are meant to do in the style back in the 1900s, when the company was actually formed in 1886, I think. So you can still communicate, again, the notion of premium and high end, and you can still do it in a manner that's disruptive. Like, we've done some really high end flooring companies where just the lettering and the way in which it's comprised feels very premium and feels very memorable too, like the way the wrap is done. So you can always still communicate that sense of premium, and you could still do it in a way that's disruptive, right? So I like to also think about this too, Danny. Like, so whatever trade that you're in, let's imagine that you're a general contractor, or you're a builder, and you go on Google and you type in general contracting logos, and then you click on the image tab. If you start seeing your own logo pop up in those listings, then you're doing it wrong. You know,
I can see that exact logo. It's like
yeah.
three houses
Yeah,
with
it's the
like
three
the
house one.
arches.
Like, you know what I'm talking about. It's the three house one, or it's the saw blade, or it's the hammer. And so that's the other notion too, where you can't really be disruptive if the logo is clip art, if the logo has been overused by everyone in your town, if it feels painfully obvious. Like, you would say, well, why would you use a rooster for a garage door company? And sort of that's the genius of it, is you wouldn't normally use a rooster for a garage door company. But I don't know of any other roosters that are used as mascots for garage door companies. But now I remember this particular one because it's not the bullshit clip art logo of a garage door, right? Why would I remember that? But I'll probably remember the rooster, right? So I think, that's another thing just to think about is everything feels really, really common, really, really expected, whether it's the colors, whether it's the clip art that you're using, things like that. Those are going to be so much harder to live in someone's mind than something that feels a little bit different and a little bit unexpected for that particular trade.
As we wrap things up here, I want to ask one personal question for you. What has been the most unexpected, maybe even challenging thing about growing KickCharge?
So the most unexpected thing was I almost died 3.5 years ago. So I got diagnosed with a heart issue that I was fortunate to have a second opinion, a doctor find, whereas the first doctor said, like, you're totally fine, nothing's wrong with you, and meanwhile I had two 95% blockages in my widowmaker artery. So that was probably the most challenging part, is dealing with that, and it also was the best thing to ever happen to me. Of course, the not dying part was pretty cool, but while I was dealing with it, I had to let this company run without me. And what I found is that it ran amazing, and that I had the right leadership here to make that happen, and that I hadn't really given them an opportunity to live up to their potential previously because I was too actively involved in things that I shouldn't have been or didn't need to be involved in. So that experience, I think, was one of the hardest things to go through on a personal level, like getting myself back to health. And listen, I'm a guy that's been racing bicycles for 25 years. I weigh 150 pounds, and I'm not the poster child for cardiovascular disease, that's for sure. So dealing with this certainly was pretty shocking for me. But it gave me the opportunity to really lean on the people and the leadership that I had put in place. And what I found is that they embraced the responsibility, and they far exceeded my expectations on it. And that's allowed me, since that event, it'll be 4 years in February. I don't run things here anymore. I don't do day to day, and I always hated being involved in that stuff to begin with, but I always thought, well, I needed to be involved in that stuff. But now I'm not, and I love my job so much better because I focus on the things that I love, and that's working on things related to branding and logos. And I have other people here that run day to day, and they've done an amazing job to help grow and build this company to what it is today. So, I say, for the smaller companies as they grow, and as they invest in employees, is to, you'd be surprised what your employees can do for you if you give them the opportunity to shine. And these guys rose up and just totally killed it for me. And probably the best thing that ever happened to me on a personal and professional level. And also just the notion too of recognizing at that particular point that every day that I gained after that surgery was ultimately really a bonus day, because if I had not gotten a second opinion, it was pretty imminent that I would have died, right? So
Wow.
so I think all those things together were a great turning point, and certainly I found the newfound respect and sense of gratitude that I try to bring into my daily life.
Yeah.
That's probably a pretty long ass answer.
I love that. That might have been my favorite answer of the whole podcast. That's powerful, man. What a paradigm shift. Holy cow. Man, thank God you're alive, and thank God we're having this discussion right now. Before I ask the last question, just want to reiterate, go get the book, Branded Not Blanded. It's going to answer a lot more of the questions, and it'll be your guide for getting your brand to be memorable and stand out amongst competition. Dan, what's something that you want to leave the audience with, just that parting word, whether it's an ask, a challenge, a word of wisdom? What's that final final thought?
I would say, listen, don't be complacent. Okay, don't look at the success that you've attained as the reason why you can't continue to think about branding in a different manner. And I'll give you one quick example. We did the branding for Tommy Mello from A1 Garage. I don't know if you know who Tommy Mello is, but probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know. But he was at $40 million in revenue when he decided to rebrand. And by all benchmarks, you're at $40 million in revenue. You're obviously doing a hell of a lot of things correct at that particular point. But he had grown to a place where the brand no longer represented the quality of service that they provided. And so he knew where he wanted to go. He couldn't get there with the brand that he had. So at 40 million, he rebranded. 3 or 4 years later, they were at 200 million in revenue. Hugely successful. So, the best thing I can say is, they say that, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. So I like to say success in spite of a poor brand is not a valid reason to perpetuate it. So it sucks sometimes to take a hard look at what your own brand is. I know it's a warm blanket for many owners, but in a lot of ways, it's the thing that's actually holding you back from taking you to where you want to go. And it's affecting so many things, from recruitment to average tickets to booking rates to close rates. So all those things are being affected by it. And so sometimes it's just good to take an honest look at it and see if it's something that you can improve upon. So
awesome. Dan, thanks for being on Blue Collar Visionary. Appreciate all the wisdom, the gems, and anywhere you want people to go?
If they want to find out more about us, they could go to KickCharge.com. And if they want to do that self-evaluation on their brand, they could go to sparktest.kickcharge.com and see how they score. And I think that there's there's a lot of good insights that they'll learn along the way.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for listening to Blue Collar Visionary. I'm excited about the journey we're on. And if you haven't already, hit like, hit subscribe, show a little love for the work, show a little love for your boy. We are building something. I got a 10-year vision on this, and I want you to be a part of it. So thank you for spending your last hour with me. Don't forget, if you want all the actionable insights from this show and all the other shows, trade your email in the link below, and you'll get access instantaneously. All right, be good. Talk later.